Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 16th edition of the LawDeb debate. It's fantastic to be back for our first physical debate since 2019. 3 long years, and it feels like a lifetime, doesn't it, since we were last here. And we very nearly weren't, as there has been a bomb scare in the area earlier on. The building was evacuated, but thankfully it was sorted in time, and I hope your journeys have not been disrupted. This is also our first ever hybrid event, so a warm welcome not just to those present, but to those watching online. And those watching online will also be able to participate in the vote, and we'll be able to feed questions in as well, and we'll try and pick up 1 or 2 questions from the online audience if we can, but no guarantees there. For those of you that I've not yet met, my name is Daniel Barlow, and I am one of the trustee directors in the LawDeb team. My job is just to cover off a few preliminary items, and then I'll be handing over to my colleague and MD of the pension trustee business, Vicky Paramore, sitting in the middle over there, and she will chair the debate. Vicky will introduce our speakers a little bit later, but I just wanted to personally thank Larcia, Darwin, Lauren and Daniel for participating in this evening's debate. I know they're all very passionate about the topic. I'm really excited to hear them debate it a little bit later. I'm really looking forward to that. So I think it was in October of last year when Mark Ashworth, LawDeb's very senior and highly esteemed trustee director, approached me after a team meeting with a slightly menacing look on his face and made me an offer I couldn't refuse. Daniel, would you like to host next year's debate? To be fair to Mark, having delivered what is known in the trade as a total hospital pass, he really couldn't have been more supportive through the process. Mark is, of course, renowned for his vast experience and for having the kind of wisdom that would make Master Yoda look like a fool. Mark's advice was, in fact, so helpful that I thought I would share a couple of highlights with you. Listen, sonny boy, you won't need a haircut, obs, but you best have a shave, and whatever you do, don't have a drink beforehand. And Mark, where is Mark? I have to confess that I've managed 1 out of 3 tonight. So I'm going to have to ask your forgiveness. Good, I think I'm forgiven. Excellent, good news. So before we get to the main business of the evening, a couple of housekeeping items as follows. Phones to silent, please. Don't turn them off because you're going to need them in a minute to vote through the Slido app. There you are. So you can, if you haven't got on it, then you can get on it now. No fire practice is scheduled, so if it goes off, assume it's real. The debate is being recorded and will be available to view online afterwards, which means it will be in the public domain, so best behaviour, please, everybody. In terms of the rules of the debate, there is usually only one, and that is that the chair's word is final. However, in light of the slightly sort of controversial and potentially emotive nature of the topic for tonight's debate, we felt it necessary to add a second rule. If anybody gets upset by anything they hear tonight, please would they refrain from walking up to the front and just sort of slapping the speakers. Your cooperation in this matter would be greatly appreciated. You really couldn't make that stuff up, could you? So to warm everybody up and get us used to the Slido, we've got a warm-up motion, which we would like you to vote on. And hopefully it will appear on your screen. And the motion is: this House believes that the winner of the next US presidential election due in 2024 will be, and you have a choice, Joe Biden, Ron DeSantis, Kamala Harris, Meghan Markle, Donald Trump, or an other. So I'll just give you all a few moments there to place your votes, and hopefully the results will appear on the screen shortly. Wow. What do you make of that? So, another piece of advice that I got from Mark was not to comment on political matters. And I'm actually going to ignore that too. Don't panic, though. All I'm going to say is that whatever you think about the potential choice facing the US electorate, at least they've got one. And there's one or two countries at the moment who I think we'd all agree would benefit from having a choice as well. So actually the bookies have Meghan Markle at 250 to 1 and Donald Trump as favourite currently. Sharp intake of breath, and strap in everybody. Could get bumpy. So anyway, enough of that. Hopefully you've got used to how the voting works. Not very complicated. I'm now going to put the motion for this evening's debate. And as per our usual practice, we'll not reveal the result of the initial vote until later, but we will reveal it before we reveal the result of the final vote. So you'll vote now, initial vote, and vote later once you've heard all the speakers and the Q&A, and we'll see whether there's been any movement. And the motion is: this House believes that increasing diversity and inclusion on pension trustee boards is best achieved through use of quotas. This House believes that increasing diversity and inclusion on pension trustee boards is best achieved through use of quotas. So please do vote. I'll give you 15-20 seconds to do that. The result will then be stored, and we will reveal it a little later, as I just mentioned. Are we all set up there? Have we got it locked in? One? Yeah, excellent. Good. So we're all set, and it's now my pleasure to hand over to Vicky, who will chair the debate.
Thank you very much, Daniel. This is the first LawDeb debate that I have had the honour to chair, and it is lovely to be back doing this in person and to be back at 1 Great George Street. So I'd like to welcome everybody here tonight, and I'd also like to welcome everybody who's joining us virtually as well. We're all here because we want to do the best we can for our pension schemes and the members of those schemes. And this means that we need to be able to make the right decisions for those schemes. And to do that, we need trustee boards that work well together, draw on a range of skill sets, challenge advice and the status quo, and make properly informed decisions. Thinking about my own experience as a trustee, I believe that a diverse trustee board and inclusive way of working is key to making this happen. Diversity also makes life more interesting. Think about how boring life would be if we all shared exactly the same views, agreed on everything. We'd all be providing the same benefits to our members, invested in the same way, and we'd have the same member communications. Meetings would be short and dull, and so would the LawDeb debate. However, before we get on to talking about our motion tonight, I think it's helpful to pause and take a moment to think about what we mean by diversity and inclusion. All our speakers here agree that for tonight's purposes, when we are talking about diversity, we will be referring to protected characteristics. For example, age, sex, race, and so on. And we will also be looking beyond this to think about individuals that represent wider society, think in different ways, and bring different perspectives to the table. When we talk about inclusion, we are talking about how we work together to foster a culture that allows different people to perform to their full potential. So to the motion. We are not here to debate whether diversity and inclusion on trustee boards is a good thing. I think most of us would agree that to do the best for our pension schemes and our members, it really is. We are here to debate how we achieve diversity and inclusion on trustee boards and whether quotas are the answer. So why do we choose this subject for our annual debate? Well, for me, it's about the pace of change. We have made some great progress with this over the last few years. The trustee boards that I work with now look very different to those boards that I worked with 25 years ago when I started my career in pensions, and even different from those boards that I worked with 7 years ago when I started my career as a trustee. And it's not just on trustee boards where things have changed. I'm really proud to be able to say that on the index of women on boards and in leadership, LawDeb ranks first among financial services businesses in the FTSE 350 and second among the FTSE 250. This is also a topic that features on the pensions regulator's priorities. And it's established a large industry working group to look at how diversity can be improved within the pensions industry and specifically on pension trustee boards. The Association of Professional Pension Trustees has set up another working group to develop training and support for trustees in this space. And I know that many of you in the audience will feel passionately about this, both in terms of looking to make improvements within your own organisations, as well as through your involvement in other pensions industry working groups. But has change been fast enough? Are we in the pensions industry now starting to lag behind what is happening in wider corporate culture? And do we need to do more? Our motion this evening is, this House believes that increasing diversity and inclusion on pension trustee boards is best achieved through the use of quotas. We've got a fantastic lineup of speakers for you to talk about this tonight, who are eminently qualified to talk on this topic and have made great contributions to the pensions industry in this space. Proposing the motion, we have LawDeb and Dawid Kanoti Hahulu. And opposing the motion, we have Daniel Guerin and Lauren Peacock. All our speakers are passionate about the subject and are keen to speak on this to raise awareness tonight. However, I'd ask you to please remember that the cases that they are arguing do not necessarily reflect either their own views or the views of the organisations that they work for. So let's get started. I'd like to start by introducing our first speaker, LawDeb, who will be proposing the motion. LawDeb is an investment consultant at LCP. As a key member of the responsible investment team, LawDeb helps her clients make informed decisions which take account of wider societal issues and the S factor in ESG in particular. In her role as chair of LCP's multicultural network, LawDeb has successfully promoted an anti-racist culture within LCP and across our industry. She won Rising Star of the Year at both the Women in Pensions Awards and the Women in Investment Awards in 2021. Outside of work, Larcia is an avid reader and writer and is not afraid to call out instances of inequality and discrimination and racism in her personal blog. Larcia.
Thank you. Right, do I just start?
You do indeed.
Perfect. Cool. We need to have a goal to improve diversity and inclusion on pension trustee boards, and more generally, to improve diversity and inclusion in our industry and society. Now, as Vicky said, today I'm not here to argue about why that is the case. The arguments for why diversity and inclusion is a good thing have been made many times in many different reports. And quite frankly, I wouldn't have agreed to have been here if I was being asked to argue that diversity is in fact a good thing, or that people who look like me do in fact deserve to have a place in this industry. What I am here to talk about is how we get there, and why we need to introduce diversity quotas onto pension trustee boards in order to achieve this goal. Now, here's a stat that might surprise you. Roughly 50% of the UK population is female. Now, why do I think that stat may surprise you? Well, it's because if you were to look at pension trustee boards and extrapolate, you would think that stat looks a lot different, because 83% of all pension trustees are male. Half of all the chairs of pension trustee boards are over the age of 60. Now, these two examples are through the lens of gender and age diversity, but the conclusion is the same for other forms of diversity too. Pension trustee boards are not currently very diverse, but we know they should be. The pensions regulator has made that clear, and we're hearing more and more talk about the importance of diversity and inclusion. So why isn't that talk leading to action? Without targets, quotas, and timescales for achieving these, there is nothing to hold pension trustee boards accountable for improving their diversity. Change is simply happening far too slowly, and whatever we're doing at the moment just isn't working. Introducing quotas is the quickest way to accelerate our industry towards achieving that goal of improved diversity and inclusion on pension trustee boards. And if we don't achieve this goal quick enough, we risk taking 2 steps back for every 1 step forward. We risk losing people from minority groups who already sit on these boards and feel frustrated by the lack of progress that they see. We risk having no role models to attract new diverse talent to these boards. And we risk compromising on our fiduciary duty to manage risks as effectively as possible. So, we need quotas. We need data, metrics, measurement, and accountability in order to make this change happen. And this isn't a new idea. In our industry, we love data. We often use the saying, what gets measured gets managed. And there's a reason we say this. Historically, it's been true. Now, bear with me for a second. I'm going to bring up a topic that we might all be slightly exhausted of hearing about: climate change. Now, people have known for a very long time that climate change poses a huge threat to society. The scientific consensus on climate change is not new. And people have also known that this threat will also apply to the stability of the economy, and hence ultimately to the stability of members' benefits within a pension scheme. But until very recently, that knowledge hasn't really led to action. But now, climate change has become one of the most important issues for pension trustee boards. It is so high on the agenda that many of you may in fact be slightly exhausted of hearing about it. So, why has this changed? It's because now trustees are required to collect, measure, and manage climate-related data and metrics. And that's led the whole industry to take climate change more seriously and actually take practical actions to address it. Diversity and inclusion is very similar to this. Measuring diversity-related metrics and setting targets will ensure that action is taken. And actually, coming up with a starting point for these targets Isn't that hard? The Hampton-Alexander Review on Gender Equality in the Workplace set out a recommendation that every board of directors of large companies should aim to have at least 40% of their board made up of women. The Parker Review on Racial Equality in the Workplace set out a recommendation that every board should aim to have at least 1 by 21, at least one person of colour on their boards by 2021, something which has not yet been achieved. Both of these recommendations were also endorsed by the Bank of England and the FCA in their recent discussion response on diversity and inclusion. So, a potential starting point for trustees would be to implement these two recommendations. It would be to require 40% of their board to be made up of women and to have at least one person of colour on their boards. Now, this is not a perfect quota. It only addresses two aspects of diversity, race and gender, and it doesn't take into account the nuances of the different experiences that different ethnic groups face. But it's a start. As we have learnt with climate-related metrics and targets, we cannot afford to wait around to come up with the perfect targets or the perfect quotas. The fact of the matter is, these perfect quotas probably just don't exist. Instead, we need to start somewhere, take action, and be prepared to adapt these quotas as we learn, rather than just avoid setting them at all. Now, I can't talk about quotas without bringing up the elephant in the room, and that's the concept, or perhaps the myth, of meritocracy. When the topic of diversity quotas comes up, the first things I usually hear are, oh, but we only hire based on merit, or we just want the best person for the job, or we don't want people from minority groups to feel like they only got the job because they're a minority. And to be honest, I have some sympathy for this, because that's how I used to feel. Now, big revelation here, but in case any of you haven't noticed, I happen to be a brown woman. And that means that when I'm in a work context, I often have considerably more pigment in my skin than the people around me. And that did make me worry that people would think that I only got my job because of the colour of my skin or my gender, rather than because of my talent and ability. And that got me wondering, how many of the men in this room have worried that people would think that you only got your job because of your gender? How many of the white people in this room have worried that people would think that you only got your job because of your race? How many of you have grown up being taught that you will need to work twice as hard to get half as far because of the way that you look? I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, probably not many. But here's the thing. In a society where inequality is so deeply ingrained, if you are part of a privileged group, be that because of your race, your gender, your sexuality, your socioeconomic background, your lack of disability, or more, being part of that privileged group has helped you to get to where you are today. So the idea of a quota that applies to a less privileged group doesn't give people in that group some kind of unfair advantage. It doesn't mean that they're going to get a job they don't deserve. It simply levels the playing field. To move forward and evolve as an industry, we need to redefine the way we think of merit, to take into account the benefits that our differences can bring. If we do this, then it becomes clear that introducing diversity quotas does not compromise on merit. It only enhances it by considering merit and talent in a more holistic way. So, in conclusion, increasing diversity and inclusion on pension trustee boards is best achieved through the use of quotas, because otherwise, change will happen far too slowly, and we will not be able to reap the many, many benefits that diversity brings. Thank you.
Thank you very much, last year. Very interesting points there. So do we need quotas because change without them will be too slow? Our second speaker, who will be opposing the motion this evening, is Daniel Gehring. Daniel is a partner and head of the pensions sector group at Travers Smith and has advised on pensions for over 20 years. He's also an experienced trustee, and his roles include serving as chair of 2 trustee boards, Refugees at Home, which he helped set up and which has now provided over 200,000 nights of free accommodation, including to Ukrainian refugees, and Just Like Us, the UK's LGBTQ young people's charity. Daniel's other D&I work includes co-founding OPEN, chairing the SPP's D&I working group, and co-chairing one of the pensions regulators' D&I working groups. Daniel has a particular interest in the importance of D&I for good governance and has written about this extensively, including for the p.l.c.'s D&I Made Simple guide. Daniel.
Thank you. What do you see when you look at this panel and when you look around this room? I can't be certain what you see, but what I can be certain of is that it's just a tiny portion of what each of us is. Take me as an example. I'm pretty obviously a white man, nearing middle age, and hopefully I look pretty professional. But what you can't necessarily tell straight away is that I'm gay, that I'm a Christian, and that's something that I often find harder coming out about than being gay. I went to a comprehensive school, and that I'm shortly, all being well, going to become a dad. Put plainly, no quota can capture who I am, nor who any of us are. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to cover 3 points. Firstly, I'm going to show that quotas only produce and can only produce a narrow and superficial type of diversity. They are a quick fix and not a very good one. Secondly, we will look at the potentially negative effect quotas can have on inclusion and why this matters. And then with these points in mind, thirdly, I will argue that we have a duty to forget about the quick fix solution that quotas could provide and instead commit to broader structural change, both out of a sense of what is right and to maximise outcomes for members. Here are some figures. They sound good. They're all from countries which have quotas for women holding board positions for large listed companies, and they're all from 2021. France, 45%. Norway, 41%. Sounding a little bit Eurovision, isn't it? Germany, 36%. And each one of these meets or slightly exceeds the level required by the quota. But the problem is that in most cases, gender is where it ends. A few countries look at disability too, and a smaller number still look at race. But LGBTQ issues, religion, social mobility, and many others, well, you may as well whistle. So not genuine diversity, but diversity narrowly defined on any level. Why do we think this is? Is it because these countries don't care about black people or disabled people or gay people? I don't think so. Instead, I think it's because quotas can't produce more for 2 reasons. Firstly, most characteristics are hard to measure. And secondly, it's the mix of someone's characteristics which makes them who they really are, rather than whether they're a man or a woman, gay or straight, Muslim or an atheist, or whether they have caring responsibilities. Let's stop a moment and think about the challenges of measuring characteristics. I'm going to take 2 examples, both of which are close to my heart: disability and sexual orientation. Disability first. And in that context, now is probably an apt time to talk about quotas in the UK. In most cases, quotas are illegal in this country. And I'd argue there's a reason for that, and it's not just that we don't like being told what to do. A little bit of history might help. We used to have a national quota in the UK. The Disabled Persons Employment Act 1944 set up a general employment quota system for disabled people. requiring, amongst other things, larger employers to take on a certain number of disabled people. It was finally abolished in 1994 on the basis that it was a monumental failure, and in no small measure due to campaigning by disability rights charities themselves for that abolition. A big reason for this quota's failure was that it required disabled people formally to register as disabled if they wanted to take advantage of the quota. And many people were unwilling to identify themselves in this way. Quotas require putting people in uncomfortable boxes, defining themselves by reference to just one element of who they are, not to mention potentially subjecting them to expert reviews to see if they are disabled enough, for example. Some of the same issues would arise if we were to introduce quotas for LGBTQ people. Again, this would require people to self-identify about something that is highly personal and may be sensitive. That may sound like a small price to pay if you've never been asked to do it yourself. But I can tell you from my own experience that that isn't how it is for many people in my community. Moving on very briefly to the second structural problem with quotas. Put simply, if quotas can't measure most single diversity characteristics, what chance do they have of producing a mix of diverse traits? One final point to add on quotas and diversity. Remember those impressive stats on gender from France, Norway, Germany, Eurovision? Well, those were at board level, 45%, 41%, 36%. We're taking a look beyond the boardroom at other management and executive positions. The picture is very different in those very same countries. In France, 22%. In Norway, 28%. And in Germany, 14%. And this is after many years of quotas. So the change driven by quotas isn't just narrow, it's also superficial, not driving deeper organisational or cultural change. So we've seen that quotas could increase diversity, albeit often in a narrow and superficial way. But I would also argue that they risk doing so potentially at the expense of the other focus of this debate, inclusion. Why does this matter? Well, the data around diversity and inclusion is challenging and open to interpretation. There is also a real lack of information specific to pension funds. But a theme that comes up time and time again in the evidence is that diverse but non-inclusive boards often do worse than boards with no diversity. The real benefit comes from more diverse boards in which all members are properly included. It's those boards that benefit from improved decision-making and achieve better results in less time. Inclusion is the result of an organisational culture where people feel that their voices are heard and that they are full members of a team. Telling people that they must increase diversity from particular groups through the use of quotas does nothing to improve this. And in fact, I would argue that there's a real risk that it makes things worse. At the extreme end of the spectrum, too often we still hear people throwing out claims of tokenism. They're only there because they're this, that, or the other. We've heard about that already. More generally, there's also a risk that the existence of quotas ends up being treated as a ceiling and as an excuse to go no further. We've met our quotas, so we've done our bit. So introducing quotas could lead us to the worst of all worlds, with no reason to believe they would result in our boards making better decisions, and a setback of another who knows how many years before we have another go at fixing diversity and inclusion in pensions. I would therefore urge all of you to forget about quick fix quotas and commit to structural change. Every one of the debaters tonight believes in the benefits of more inclusive and diverse boards. But quotas are not the way to achieve this. They make for good headlines, but real, meaningful, and impactful change has to come from elsewhere. Diversity and inclusion both need to permeate the culture of the pension sector because that's the right thing to do, and because in combination they will drive the best outcomes for our members. In this room and online tonight, we have so many of the leaders in our field that if we all committed to meaningful change, it would happen. I would challenge each and every person here tonight to go away and think about how to make this happen. Perhaps the next time you make an assumption because of how someone comes across on first impression, and we all do it, stop and challenge yourself. Or the next time you're tempted to shut down someone in a meeting, ask yourself why that really is. Let's all be allies for each other. Let's work together to be conscious of diversity and inclusion in all that we do, adapting our policies, procedures and practices to remove barriers to participation for all individuals, regardless of their characteristics. We need to get to a position where diverse and inclusive practices are commonplace because we want them and we see value in them, not because we're just told to do it. Addressing a problem of this magnitude requires bigger, more creative thinking than fixed quotas. We can do better than that. We cannot risk sacrificing meaningful, genuine diversity and inclusion for something narrow and superficial just because it's easy to do.
Daniel, thank you very much. So our quotas are crucial that don't adequately capture who we are, a quick and imperfect fix, and do nothing to address inclusion. Well, perhaps our next speaker might have something to say about that. I'd like to introduce Dawid Kanoti-Ahulu, who is going to speak in support of the motion. Dawid started his career as a junior barrister before switching to investment banking in the early 90s. He then co-founded Reddington and Mallow Street, before more recently co-creating 10,000 Black Interns. He is on the Prime Minister's Business Council and is focused on helping the Department of Education to scale up T-levels across the country.
Well, I'm going to build on last year's argument that change left to itself happens too slowly. I'm going to argue that when you leave diversity to its own devices, or when you leave change to itself, I'm going to explain what happens, and I'm going to argue that it's not good, and that all of us will understand that and will recognize that. I'm also going to argue that the time for change is now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what change could look like with the use of quotas. They say time changes things, but actually you have to change things yourself. It was Andy Warhol. They say time changes things, but actually you have to change them yourself. In 1987, I was a newly qualified, very junior, bottom of the rung barrister, and I was looking for a pupillage just for 6 months, so an internship, if you will. And I found myself down in the Temple for my one and only interview. And you know what it's like, you walk in and that rich smell of mahogany and carpets and ancient legal texts up on the wall, and I thought to myself, this is it. I thought, this is a world that I could be a part of. Well, the interview went well enough. It went so well, in fact, that they offered me the pupillage. But they said, look, you can come and you can be a pupil here, but there's a little wrinkle. We took on a black guy last year as a tenant, and we're not going to do it 2 years in a row. We can't. So we hope you understand, but you can come do the pupillage by all means, but the tenancy, not so much. We hope you understand. And I did understand, and I did the pupillage, and at the end of that, I walked down the end of Chancery Lane and turned right and went down to the city where they weren't quite as fussy. And in November 2021, so just 4 months ago, a race report came out on looking at race at the bar. And it's pretty detailed, and if you Google race at the bar report, you can see it. And the stats are pretty staggering. They're pretty shocking, actually. I think there are something like 4 commercial QCs who are black. There's 1 black High Court judge. There are no black Court of Appeal judges. There are 0 black Supreme Court judges. And in 35 years, so half a lifetime, an entire generation, nothing has really changed because, like Andy Warhol said, they say time changes things, but actually you have to change them yourself. And you might say, well, why does it matter? I mean, it's a shame that you didn't get that tenancy, of course, and that wasn't a great experience for you, but why does it matter? The bar seems to work pretty well with the setup that it has. Someone puts one side of the argument, someone puts another, and they've got a judge, and it all seems to work at some level. I mean, does it really matter what color people are, or whether they think differently, or are drawn from different backgrounds? Does it really matter? Well, when you think like that, you end up in a difficult place. So roll forward a few years, many years actually. In 2005, I was working at Merrill Lynch, and I was working in the structuring department. And one day this memo came down from the president of the bank. And he was this sort of alpha dog type, and he'd been paid $42 million a year. And he was this kind of chest-beating, big alpha male kind of guy. And his message was, look, everybody, you've got to sharpen up here because we've got Goldman Sachs and they've got a bigger credit derivatives portfolio than ours. And those more guys at Morgan Stanley, well, they're kicking our butt. And Lehman Brothers, well, they're all over us as well. Guys, we've got to sharpen up here. Well, you know what happened. And in the end, this race down Wall Street to have the biggest credit derivatives portfolio. You remember what happened? The world blew up and we had the biggest financial crisis anyone can remember. And austerity hit us in a big way. Merrill Lynch, what happened to them? Well, they were sold for not very much to Bank of America, which of course is why it's now Bank of America, Merrill Lynch. But austerity hit us, and the poor, who were already on the bottom rung of the ladder, they slipped further down. And this was global. And the rich, who are always kind of immunized to this stuff, they don't so much have a cost of living crisis, not quite as much, because they figured stuff out. They've got money, they've got things that support them in these situations. But the poor, they don't have that, and they slid further down that ladder into the abyss. And you have to ask yourself, did that have to happen? Did it have to be that way? And I think the answer is no. I thought about this minute. I was there. I watched it happen. I was part of Merrill Lynch. I watched this thing happen. You have to ask yourself, did it have to be that way? And I don't think it did. If those 10 chest-beating alpha males had actually been, if they'd been women, for example, if they'd been drawn from a community of people who have different values and who weren't paid $42 million a year and who weren't necessarily concerned about being right, but actually about doing right, I venture to think that actually this last 15 years could have been very different. I mean, 15 years it's been, we're only just raising interest rates now. I mean, 15 years, and we've kind of gotten to nowhere. And by the way, that business of everyone thinking the same, it doesn't just apply to banks, it applies to all our organizations. And of course it applies to pension, trustee boards just the same. And the reason this is so important, of course, is that a pension fund is one of the most complex organizations to run, if you think about it. I mean, I've spent a lot of time around pension funds, and just looking at the liabilities, the PV01, the duration, the longevity, just working out the liabilities, that's a thing in itself. And then you've got to figure out the assets, the asset classes, the asset managers, the consultants, put it all together, work out the crosswinds, how it all fits, end game, middle game. This is big stuff. This is complicated stuff. And by the way, not only that, you've also got a huge responsibility. Everyone in this room has a huge responsibility to deliver the pension fund that pays out in full and pays out on time. I was talking to a surgeon just over the weekend. 40 years he's been a surgeon, given his life to the NHS, and now he finds himself in a very difficult position. He put his 4 kids, he put them all through school where he had to pay school fees, and now he finds himself in a position where he said to me, Dad, all I've got actually now is my pension. I really hope it pays out, because all I've got, the cost of living thing is hitting him. He's a surgeon, he's been a surgeon for 40 years. The responsibility on all of us to get it right and to make good decisions is absolutely enormous. And the question is, how do we do that? Well, the time, of course, is now. There's no better time than now. I think it was Martin Luther King in his I Have a Dream speech, in which he talks about the fierce urgency of now. It's now. We talk about it, and afterwards we're going to socialize and have a good time, but actually we need to do something. And the fierce urgency, my friends, is absolutely now. Why now? I mean, now is a good time, actually, if you think about it, because we've got more time to think. It may not feel like that, but it has. We've got our tertiary brains, right? That thing we call the smartphone, which does all our thinking for us. So we actually think all that stuff we used to have to think about, like whether or not the train was going to be on time, or what the weather's going to be like tomorrow, or whether or not this is a good hotel to stay at, whether we can read how to read a map. We don't have to do any of that stuff anymore. Why? Because the phone does it all for us. We've got space now in our minds. Well, we can think about other things like the E and the S and the G. That's important stuff that the phones don't help us with. And we're thinking about the environment, and we're thinking about the G. We've been thinking about that since Maxwell. But now it's time to think about the S, the kind of people we want to be, the values we want to have, the kinds of organizations we want to set up, how we want to make decisions, which is why it's brilliant that we're having this conversation. When Daniel called me up and said we were having this, I thought it was fantastic that we're having this conversation. The time is now to think about the S, ladies and gentlemen, which brings us on to quotas, of course. And when I hear quotas, I shiver a little bit, because quotas always remind me of fish in the North Sea and how much you can kind of take out. And I'm like, who wants to be fish? Nobody, right? But when I think of quotas, I don't think about that. What I think about is, I think about the guest list for a dinner party. You know what it's like? Your wife, your husband, your wife, or your girlfriend, your boyfriend says to you, so who are we going to have over the weekend, to come and have a dinner with us? And you say, well, why don't we invite the Smiths? And then she says, we always invite the Smiths. I say, I know, I like the Smiths. That's why we always invite them. She says, well, why don't we invite someone different for once? And you sit down and you think, well, maybe this time we won't invite the Smiths. I mean, I like the Smiths. They think they love all my jokes. It's good to have the Smiths. But maybe we won't have the Smiths this time. Maybe someone different. And we're talking about the guest list. And as we talk about the S for social, we're talking about who comes round the table. That's basically what we're talking about. This table, we talk about the seats at the table. We're talking about who is on that guest list, people that we've never had before. And I think of Jack. So Jack, he was at Durham University in his second year, A stars, an incredible student. And in June 2020, he dived into a swimming pool and he broke his neck. And I have a son the same age, and I have to say, even telling Jack's story, it just chokes me up. Because he's 21, he has a brilliant mind, he can speak, but that's it, you know? He has to be turned every half an hour. That brilliant mind, I mean, you can understand him just thinking, well, what's the point? And then a couple of weeks ago, a firm said, we'll give him an internship. We'll give him an internship. We'll send a taxi to Jack, to his house, every day, and we'll bring him in, and the days he doesn't come in, he can do research because he can speak and he can control the internet. And I thought that was incredible. When I heard that, I just welled up. I thought that is incredible. And that's the kind of person we want around the table, someone like Jack that we've never had before, someone like Grace, who's black and who's a woman and who's been held back for various reasons. Put Grace and Jack and people like that around the table, and suddenly we start having people with grit and resilience and thinking a different way that we've never had before. And that time, of course, is now. It's now. And when we do that, because as Andy Warhol said, they say time changes everything, but actually, you have to change it yourself. And when I think of quotas, I'm really thinking about a guest list. That's what we need to do, look at the guest list. And if you don't do it, it's not just gonna happen. That, unfortunately, is the truth of it. We need to get that guest list out. We need to look at our trustee boards, and we need to say, we've got this many seats. Who do we want sitting around it? Jack, Grace, people like that? Maybe. Thank you.
So thank you very much. So change hasn't happened, and we need change, because if we all think the same way, this leads to bad outcomes, and that really matters for pension schemes. And the time for quotas is now. I'd like to introduce our final speaker, who will be opposing the motion, Lauren Peacock. Lauren is a responsible investment manager at Scottish Widows, where she focuses on stewardship and leads the board diversity stewardship theme. She also sits on the Next Gen Pensions Research and Insight Subcommittee, whose purpose is to increase diversity of thought in the pensions industry. Prior to working at Scottish Widows, Lauren worked at the responsible investment NGO Share Action, where she led engagement with the pensions industry on climate change and other environmental and social factors. Lauren.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Daniel has laid out 3 topics for us: the importance of genuine diversity, culture change, and inclusion. I'm going to build on these points with some personal experience and examples. Through a quota system, I'd be classed as a woman. And it's true that in the workplace, I bring my gender, I bring my experience of being a woman. But I don't represent all women. I barely represent our female customers. And I actually think I'm much more than just a woman. I'm from the northwest, a little town called Southport. And I'm actually a carer for my mum and travel in between Southport and London. It's a shock every time I go back. I also went to a comprehensive school, and I used to have speech difficulties after having hearing problems. And I actually think, most importantly, before Scottish Widows, I worked in the third sector. People and purpose is really crucial to me. It's what motivates me, it's what gets me out of bed in the morning. I'm sure anyone who I speak to later are much more interested in your dinner plans and your kids and where you live than your work strategy and sales. I'm a people person. And I think all these factors contributed to actually why I was hired. Not because there was a tick box or they were trying to meet a certain quota, but because diversity was sought after and really valued. And it feels really good to be part of that. I think one of the ways we can think about broadening diversity is through cognitive diversity. That starts with demographics, gender, age, socioeconomic background, disability, but it goes further. Personality, previous occupation. These things add to diversity. Quotas only allow for measurable representation. I would argue that actually we need to be thinking much broader and much more ambitious and not be using such a blunt tool. Thinking about putting cognitive diversity into practice, I think it's useful to think about some of the challenges the pension industry faces. There is many, but just 3: lack of member engagement leading to lack of savings, infrastructure problems when people do get engaged, and the number of systemic risks we have. Climate change has already been mentioned, but also just the cost of living. How do you calculate that in a portfolio? Everyone knows how complicated pension schemes are. And I really think that it's useful to think about these challenges and some of the new skills we could bring into the industry that might not be skills that we currently have or we have in short supply, and actually looking outside the industry to different occupations, people who might not have done the job before, but they've got a skill and they can learn on the job. I think this could be a really interesting and organic way to increase diversity. We did some research at Scottish Widows last year on boards and the diversity on boards. And we were asking them, how far has diversity got? And it was quite disappointing that whilst we've had a bit of gender diversity increasing based on a target approach, we've got very little ethnic diversity, and the pool of candidates hasn't really changed. Actually, one board recruiter said that proxies are still being used. So someone's been to Oxbridge, someone's been a CEO before, someone's got city experience, sail right through to board membership. I'm being dramatic, but the fact that those things are still being used as quality indicates to me that targets just isn't enough. We need to really broaden out the group of people that are able to go for board candidate positions and pension scheme trustee positions. And I think that means broadening out the skills and the backgrounds of people. I think this also creates an inclusive culture from the start. If we can recruit people with a challenge and a skill in mind, from the offset, they know why they're there, and that feels good. People don't want to feel like a tick box. They want to feel like their contribution is really valued. I think it's also worth thinking about if the role is worthwhile. I think it's easy to say that, people just aren't coming, they're not applying, but is what you're offering any good? I've said before, purpose is really important to me. And I'm really fortunate that the Scottish Widows Board is really supportive of ESG, which means we can just get on with our jobs and deliver. That purpose is crucial for me, and other people have that too. What's also important is good HR policies, good maternity policies, flexible working. All these things sound like little things, but they really depend on whether people stay or go. My team, we've all got each other's back. We're really open about our responsibilities outside work. And that means I like working there and I stay. Also, these things benefit everybody, right? Everyone likes flexibility. I recently saw a member-nominated trustee role that had got away with the kind of CV and nomination kind of technique, and instead just done an application where people put in their skills and their passion about the role and see where they get to. And it was so open and inclusive. I reached out to the scheme and asked them, did you get more applications? And they said, yeah, way more than we've ever got. And let's be real here, it would be much quicker to just do the old application, whatever they did the year before, 5-minute job, done. But actually doing this new approach took time and effort, and they had to think about it. What's the best way that we can contribute and have a positive action? And I think this thinking is really useful. It takes people on a journey, and it makes them think about what they're actually doing and the positive celebratory aspect of it. Quotas don't ensure that the environment is inclusive. They're a quick fix. I think in pensions we've already talked about, we like things that are measured and easy to assess, but culture and inclusion aren't. They're about mindset and actions. And that's harder, but it's crucial. For me, diversity is about the actions we take and not the boxes we tick. Thank you.
Lauren, thank you very much. So protected characteristics don't adequately describe who we are. True diversity is much more nuanced than that, and thank you, Lauren, for some of the excellent examples you gave us of that. So this is the point, ladies and gentlemen, that we will open the debate up to the floor and ask for your contributions. Those of you who have attended LawDeb debates in the past will be familiar with our two roving mics, Chatterton and Jaffe. I'm sorry to say that Michael Chatterton is on holiday today, so we have one roving mic and one roving Sankar. In a moment, Mike and Sankar will take up their positions with the microphones. If you'd like to make a contribution, please do raise your hand and say who you are and which organisation you are representing. You may have a question for our speakers, in which case, please can I ask you to remember that they will be responding on the basis of the most persuasive arguments for the proposition and opposition, and not necessarily in line with their own views. Also, please do feel free to make any relevant points or observations that you might have. You don't just need to restrict yourself to questions. And we will also, I think, be taking some questions from our virtual audience. So we have Sally up there who will be acting as our moderator. So those of you who are watching virtually, please do feel free to submit your questions as well. So over to you, and Mike and Sankar, if you'd like to take your positions, please. Okay. Well, we have, I think, lady over there.
Thank you. I'm Laura Brown and I work for Legal & General, and I wanted to share a reflection on the LawDeb debate itself, because I attended my first debate 10 years ago, I think it is. Michael Portillo was chairing, and I'm fairly sure it was all men on the panel, but I can't be 100% sure. And Michael Portillo went through all the contributions from the floor, and at the end he said, "Gosh, is there a woman here who'd like to ask a question?" And so I thought, well, and I was a very young in the industry person at that time, and I thought, well, I'd really better ask a question now. So I did. I have no idea what the debate was about or what I asked. But what I do know is that the following year I was asked to speak on the panel. And I'm pretty sure that everybody had reflected on that occasion, and Mark will be able to provide confirmation on that they was thinking, actually, maybe we need a quota. Maybe we need to ensure that there are women represented on this panel, because myself and another lady were next year, two of the speakers. And, you know, for me, that was a massive opportunity. I was only, I think, 32, and nobody knew who I was or anything like that. And I just thought, as I was listening to the debate today, that is exactly the point. I'm fairly sure you guys thought we'd better get some women. Let's have a quota. To Daweed's point, let's change the guest list here. And now, over recent years, and looking at the panel today, I don't think you need a quota anymore. I'm sure you don't even think about it, because naturally speaking, the pensions world has evolved, and this is the result of it. And so when everybody's sort of thinking about quotas and how they operate, I think we can all probably reflect on aspects of our life and think, actually, maybe I benefited from a quota at some point or another.
Thank you very much, and great to have our first question from a woman. I mean, I don't know if any of our panel have any observations on that? No? Probably more of a statement than anything else. Okay, does anybody else have any questions? Gentleman down here.
Hello, thank you. My name is Desmond, and I also work at Legal & General. So I guess you're fulfilling the Legal & General quota here.
Perhaps we need a quota on that.
I think my statement is more a reflection of the discussion had, which speaks to the whole guest listing. I think that's what we're picking up on, because with that comes an element of intentionality. And I think that's what a lot of the conversation is about. Are we being intentional as to who we bring in? Because unconsciously or subconsciously, there are biases that we individually have. And so this element of quota is saying, how are we challenging the way we think? And how are we saying to ourselves, what are the differences we want to make? And how are we going to do that? By bringing in people who give us different perspectives.
Excellent, thank you. Any comments from our panel?
Can I comment on the first one, actually? I'll go back to it.
Please do.
It made me think, and I feel kind of similar that I've been asked to speak on things after raising a question, especially, but I think it's less for being a woman, and I think it was actually because I was often the charity voice in the room and asking a different question that was a bit different, that they were like, oh, she's a bit different, we'll bring her on the next panel. So it's an interesting.
Yeah, I've got one a bit similar, which is I was, well, maybe not directly related, but I wrote a blog that was perhaps a bit too controversial for LCP, so it didn't go out. But afterwards, because I'd been a bit challenging, I was asked to speak at our conference. So sometimes, being able to be a voice that's a bit different does help.
Excellent. We've got lots of questions. So perhaps if we can take a question from the lady here and then the lady there afterwards. Mike, I think, probably.
Lena Thacker from Momentum Consulting. Laura is a dear friend, and on this occasion, I often agree with her, but on this occasion I'd actually have to disagree. As a woman, brown woman, of Indian origin, I've often told myself the narrative that I've got where I am and I am who I am because of the hard work, the ability, and I've been the best candidate for the job. And sadly, I mean, although I can see the simplicity in the argument, I actually don't want to stop telling myself that narrative. I want to always be at the table or on the guest list because I deserve that position and because it's of my ability to be there, not because of a quota. I think it is far too simplistic.
Great. So, I think some suggestion there that maybe quotas aren't the right answer. Any comments from our panel on that? No?
Agree.
I think I would just say that I probably felt similarly at one point, but then once I learnt more about some of the other structural inequalities in our society that don't necessarily apply to me also as an Indian woman, that made me realise that actually there are inequalities that perhaps can't be addressed just by, working twice as hard. So I do empathise with you, but I think my thinking has kind of changed since then.
Thank you. Lady over there.
I'm Vanessa Hodge from Mercer. As a general observation around pension trustees on boards, there are lots of chairs of trustees who've been in that role for 10 plus years, decades, always doing that role, even independent trustees who are in some way no longer independent, and member-nominated trustees who keep going up for re-election because there's either no one else who wants the job, and as a trustee it's quite a big job. So thinking about diversity, inclusion, and not from quotas, what if the industry said, actually, you have a minimum term, and then you need to replace, and then you bring in diversity of thought that way?
I think that's a really good question, and of course the APPT does have some guidance on that. I mean, I don't know, perhaps Daniel, if you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to comment on that. I mean, I'd be very clear on it. As Vicky said, I have a big kind of beef about governance. I don't think anybody should be a trustee for that long, really simply. The trustee boards who ask me my opinion, I say, let's not have an arbitrary cliff edge, but let's have terms which rotate, and let's have a point where there is a rebuttable presumption at the very least that you will move off unless something's going on, which means you really need to stay there to see it through. So I think that's good for diversity and inclusion reasons, but it's good for other reasons as well.
But I think the moving off after a short period of time or after a set period of time is of course very sensible. We'd all agree with that. In fact, I'm about to step off a board that I've been on for 6 years just because it's 6 years, and they're like, well, why don't you stick for another? I'm like, I'm done. 6 years is about the right amount of time, and it's time to step off. So I do think stepping off makes sense. But then it's who you replace this person with, and in that is the very hard question. And to your point about intentionality, it's where it gets real. So it's very easy for someone steps off and then you replace them with kind of a little bit different, but not really. And you missed a big opportunity because now you've got another 6 years to wait before you can do it again. And unless you're really intentional about it and you think about who you want on that guest list, you're going to find probably that it's a kind of riff on the same tunes that you've been playing for the last however many years it is. I mean, people disagree with that, but I don't think this stuff just happens by accident. You've got to be really intentional about it.
No, I mean, if I may just respond to that, I think we would all agree with that. I would 100% agree with that. I just wouldn't agree that it would be necessarily people who are put there because of a quota, for the reasons that we've explained. let's be intentional, but let's be intentional and sophisticated and think about the best person for that role, taking into account everything that we're looking at in that role and in that person.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's just that the word quota is so emotive. You say quota and you just, I feel a bead of sweat run down the back of my neck when you say quota. I don't like the word. But essentially what you're talking about, I think, is being intentional about it and working out what you want that seating plan to look like. Just like when you have a dinner party, I just said it, right? But you look and you think, what should it look like? And I just don't think we do enough of that in our industry. We sort of look at it and go, well, we've got 3 women and like 5 guys. Hey, we're diverse. And it doesn't work like that. It doesn't actually work like that. You're much more intentional about who's at the dinner party. You wouldn't have a dinner party like that, would you? No. You'd be much more intentional. Are they going to get on with them? And what are they going to bring to the... You've got to start thinking like that. And when you do that, then it gets really interesting. So when I say quota, I'm not talking about box ticking. I completely agree with Lauren's point, which is, who wants to tick boxes? No one does, right? But it's not. It's about more than that. They're good to get into the conversation and to see what other people think about. Sorry,
yeah. Okay, I can see 2 hands. So perhaps if I could go to the gentleman here and then the lady over there afterwards.
Thank you, Roving Mike. So it's Alex Hucknalls from Cardano Advisory. At the risk of redefining the carefully curated question that LawDeb have asked as a motion, what does the panel think of introducing the word equality, so the E of D, E and I? Does that change any of how you've thought about the arguments that you've been putting forward for and against the motion?
So when I think about the E and D and I and the way that, we're doing quite a lot of work at LCP on this at the moment. We position it as equity rather than equality. And rather than that meaning everybody having the same equal access to the opportunities, it's making sure that, people have what they need in order to progress in the same way. And for me, that's where the idea of quotas really supports the concept of equity, because it takes into account the fact that we don't have a level playing field to start with. So for everybody to be able to have the same access to the same endpoints, sometimes things need to be adjusted at the start. I don't know. I'm sure lots of you have lots of way more interesting thoughts.
Laura, would you like to
respond to that? Yeah, it's fun, isn't it? I would say I think the equality thing is interesting, because I kind of feel like if we're hiring more women and more people of colour, then it's actually not up to them to represent. It's actually up to everyone else on the trustee board to be allies and be understanding and speak up and stand up. It's not, so that the kind of equality aspect is almost on everybody else, not just through the people you're bringing in.
I would agree with equity, but I would say that quotas are just far too blunt a measure to deliver it.
Thank you. Lady over here, please.
Hi there, it's Sarah Swift from Evershed Sutherland. So my question, I think, is for Daniel and Lauren's side. So I came here pretty much against the idea of quotas because, as you say, they're quite blunt. But the arguments in favour of them are quite persuasive, and I suppose they're also at least a way of doing something, and it's a start. So Daniel, I think when you were speaking, you were talking about quotas being too blunt to measure, and you need structural change. So the question I've got is, well, if you don't have quotas, how do you achieve structural change from the top down?
Yeah, well, I'm happy. Do you want?
Yeah, no, you start.
I think that, I put out a challenge, didn't I? I said, if we look around this room, we look online, we have a lot of the leaders of our industry in one place. We're all clever people, we're all sophisticated people, and if we believe this is the right thing to do, then there's plenty of things that we can straight away get on with and do to make change. I could talk for the next 3 hours about it. I'd rather not, because I was going to have a drink. But read the p.l.c. Diversity and Inclusion Made Simple guide. Read some of the other excellent material that's out there from LCP, from Aon, from my firm. There's lots and lots of practical things we can do. We just need to get on and do it. And I genuinely believe that if we focus on quotas, which for the reason we have discussed are by definition narrow and a quick fix to a limited range of issues, it will distract from getting on with the structural fundamental change which we need.
Can I take questions from gentlemen down here, please? Sorry, I'm making you walk around a lot, Sankar.
Thank you. I certainly didn't come here tonight thinking that my greatest lack of diversity would be to be employed by Legal and General. As a member of their independent governance committee. And I certainly very much took Desmond's point about intentionality, and I think a number of people have raised that. But I think we can't just talk about intentionality, we have to have practical measures that deliver results within that intentionality. Otherwise, we might as well just give up and have quotas. And so I'd like to throw just a couple of thoughts into this. One would be that pension trustee boards should have self-evaluations, and they should publish the conclusions of those self-evaluations, particularly with regards to their diversity and what they might be looking for over time as people come off the board. I'd also support maximum time limits. And then when it comes to recruitment, I think they should also publish when they've recruited what the process was that they undertook in hiring the person that they hired, and articulate how they have tried to find diversity in the broadest sense of the word in that process. And in that way, boards can be made accountable. But I think if as a group of, as you say, Daniel, although I'll leave myself out of this, but very clever people, we can't get our act together there, then I think that quotas certainly would be the right way forwards, because at least you'd start making progress if you're stuck.
Thank you. So a question there about more transparency and self-evaluation and recruitment processes. I mean, I don't know, Dawood, do you want to go back on that perhaps?
Yes, I mean, I would just say that in the last 18 months, I've been increasingly involved in having conversations with organizations about this issue of intentionality and what are you actually planning to do. And it is extraordinary how many, I'd say everybody gets it and wants to do something and says, yeah, we're in, we want to do something. It's not like it would have been maybe 10 years ago and people are like, not really. Now everybody's in on it. But what they need is some metric by which they can measure their success. So as you'll know, I'm very involved with the 10,000 Black Interns program, and now we've rolled it out, we've expanded it, just a small pilot program, but to disability. And so we've called up a few organizations and said, would you be prepared to take someone with a serious disability and give them an internship for 6 weeks? As the response has been extraordinary. Everyone says, absolutely. And everyone sort of thinks to themselves, actually, I don't work with anyone who's profoundly deaf or who can't see or who is in a wheelchair with cerebral palsy. I just never have. In 35 years, never done that. And everyone sort of has a sense that would be a good thing to do. When you ask them, we've been thinking about that. But then when you say, how many people with a disability would you be prepared to take? And they have to go away and think about it, and they come back and they say, 5. And then you say, okay, we will give you 5 CVs of people with a serious disability. You do understand that you're going to have to make quite a lot of changes, because maybe the loo door's not wide enough, or maybe there's too much noise for people with, neurodiversity, or whatever it is. You're going to have to make some profound changes. And people say, that's fine, we'll do that. And that, I suppose, is an example of how quotas work. And everyone wants to do the right thing, and has the intentionality. But until you actually force people, as it were, to say, this is the number, it kind of doesn't happen. I mean, in what world was Jack going to get an internship unless someone said, yeah, we want to do this, and it's going to be part of our quota, as it were. So I think it does work.
Thank you. Daniel, Lauren, anything you'd like to add to that?
Nope.
Okay. I think in that case, I'm going to take one more question from the floor, and then I'd like to go to Sally to see if we've got any questions from our virtual audience. So over here, please, Mike.
Paul McGlone from Aon. I suppose the challenge I see is, somebody told me, and I don't know if it's true or not, that there are something like 30,000 pension scheme trustees in the UK, and it would be great to get diversity amongst that population. What I struggle with is, how do I do that within a board of 6 people? And how we do that in a way that doesn't mean that all of our boards of 6 people become diverse in the same way. If we focus on whether gender or race or disability or neurodiversity or whatever all the other things are that I've missed. Whatever we focus on, we may get that, and we may get that 1,000 times over, but we won't get the other things. And I guess my question for the panel is how, I like the idea of quotas, I like the idea that it generates change faster than would otherwise happen, but how do we do that it generates change across all of the different characteristics and not just the ones we happen to pick to start with?
So quite a practical question there about how you might get diversity through the use of quotas with small boards. Larcy, do you want to have a go at answering that?
Yeah, I mean, that is a hard question. What I would say is there have been quite a lot of studies that have been done looking at board level diversity, and those studies have set out recommendations of the kind of quotas you could introduce, like the Parker Review and Hampton-Alexander Review. I think you're right, it is impossible to capture, the full nuances of the UK population or a wider market in a group of 6 people. You can't require that you're going to have half of an Indian person on every board, but I still don't think that should stop us from doing anything. But it's a very fair challenge. What do you think, Dawood?
Look, I think it's like that, or when we used to go around telling pension funds you need to hedge your liabilities, and they're like, well, there aren't any gilts. What are we supposed to do? And the swaps aren't long enough. Yeah, it's true, but you've got to do it. You've got to start somewhere, and you've got to say, look, let's look at ourselves and let's start. And I think when you do that, you surprise yourself, and suddenly you're like, oh, actually, there's more people out there than I thought who have whatever it is that you're looking for. So you've just got to look at yourselves and look at your characteristics, and then work out what more diverse might look like. And of course, it is hard. In fact, when we were talking about this motion, we were thinking exactly this point, that maybe we should kind of talk about the entire industry rather than this. But this is a very real question, because otherwise you say, well, I would if we were bigger, but there's only 6 of us. What am I supposed to do? It is what it is. And yeah, you've got to start somewhere, and it's not an excuse. And I think there are a bunch of cards that people play. I'm not saying that anyone is doing that, but I think there are all these, well, there's not enough of us. Well, where are we going to find them? Well, and on it goes, and then nothing changes. So, like your man, Mr. Warhol said, you got to change this stuff.
So I don't think you can get representation when 6 people on a board, but I think what you can think about is the challenges and the skills that we need, and potentially think broader. Do you have a really good communicator? Do you have a big thinker? Do you have someone who's good at tech and data? And I think that lens, you might organically just get there more people applying, because different type of role, and it will just happen organically.
I think the question you asked was, can we get to that on 6-person boards through quotas? And my answer would be very simple, no. You can get through that through structural change.
Thank you. Sally, do we have any questions from our virtual audience, please?
We do indeed, and first of all, a thank you to our virtual audience for supplying us with both questions and comments. If I may, I was going to go for a comment and 2 questions. So the highest rated comment on there was from Tess Page, and she wanted to say how valuable it was from a D&I perspective to have both in-person and virtual attendance, and that she was enjoying watching you all on her telly. And that was the highest rated comment through our Q&A. So thank you.
Excellent. That's great to hear.
And then the first question I wanted to raise from our virtual audience comes from Aaron Slocum, and he said, if quotas don't work, should we ditch voluntary target setting too? Do these things, quotas or targets, not start the debate and create accountability?
That's a really interesting question. I think maybe if I could go first, perhaps to Daniel on that.
No, I don't think targets really work either. I think all these things demonstrate a lack of ambition amongst a group of people who could do a lot better.
Thank you. Larcia, Dawood?
Yeah, I mean, I would say quotas are very similar to some of the other targets we set, like the example I gave with climate change. And I think, in our industry where we do love data so much, they have been proven to work overall, or at least to get everybody thinking about it enough to actually drive forward change. I don't think that, quotas and structural change are mutually exclusive. I think that they can support each other. Yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. And Sally, our next question, please.
Yeah, so then our highest rated question coming in online at the moment is from Jeannie Drake, and she says, Is the rise of professional trustees enhancing or inhibiting the speed of progress to great diversity on trustee boards? How could we resist such a question? Surely there's only one right answer. But yeah.
I'm not sure I want to hear the answer to that. Okay, perhaps I can ask Darwin to have a go. Be nice.
I'm going to have to fess up. I didn't hear the question. What was it?
Is the rise of the professional trustee enhancing or inhibiting the speed of progress to great diversity on trustee boards?
Look, I mean, I think the rise of the professional I think having professional trustees is very important. Is it enhancing or I don't know. I mean, this is a hard area. This is a really difficult area. I'm not sure there's any obvious right answer to it. But whatever, it's inevitable that we're going to have the rise of the professional trustee. That's a given over the next, and it's rightly so. This is, like I said, one of the hardest things to run as a pension fund, and it's getting harder and harder. So got to be professional and got to get more, at least more and more professional. And yeah, we've got to keep doing what we're talking about doing, which is diversifying up.
Daniel, do you want to have a go at commenting on that too?
Oh, thanks. I think it has the potential to be very impactful in a positive way. I think the question holds the feet of every professional trustee house in the country to the fire in relation to this issue. And what I would say, without wishing to sound overly, whatever the word is, creepy towards LawDeb is, I would just pick up on Laura's comment earlier. Let's remember what LawDeb looked like when I started my career in pensions 20 years ago. It didn't look like this, it didn't sound like this, and I can conceive of no situation where the LawDeb debate would have been about this issue. So I think this is this is an example of where professional trustees can help drive the debate and can help drive really important discussions like the one we're having tonight.
If I might use my chair's prerogative to comment as well, I think there are probably two things I'd like to say. So first of all, I personally believe that it's just as important to have diversity within firms of professional trustees as more broadly on trustee boards. But a plea for me, I think it's also important that professional trustees are not used to simply fulfill diversity requirements on boards. I think it's very important that sponsors look within their own organisation and more broadly than that too, in order to ensure that there is true diversity on trustee boards as well. And I think with that, we probably need to draw our questions from the floor to a close. So thank you all very much. I think it's been really nice to see the things that we actually agree on. Perhaps a little bit of a pity that there's a bit of a lack of diversity and we have so many people in the audience from Legal and General, but there you are. Some support for quotas, I think, has been expressed. Perhaps they are needed to drive the change that we really do need. But some interesting comments, I thought, on other ways to achieve diversity, including things like chair rotation and the need to be intentional in how we think about the makeup of our trustee boards as well. At this point, I'd like to invite our speakers to make their concluding remarks before we hand back to Daniel for the voting. So, Larcia is going to make some concluding remarks in favour of the motion. So, Larcia, if you'd like to go to the podium.
Thanks. So, as Vicky said, we all agree that we want to achieve this goal of improved diversity and inclusion on pension trustee boards. And what Lauren and Daniel have said is true. Quotas alone will not do this. Quotas need to be supported by inclusive practices and by real, meaningful structural change. But that doesn't mean we should wait until our culture is fixed or until we achieve perfect inclusion before we introduce quotas. Sometimes we do need to be more intentional with how we design that guest list in order to actually achieve the inclusive culture in the first place. If we all agree that diversity and inclusion is important, then we should be focusing on taking actions to get there, rather than just talking about it. And the introduction of quotas is the quickest action that we can take to get there. Now, I want to take this opportunity to reflect on the forum that we're in right now. These debates are really great. As we've said, there's so many clever people in the room, and they spark a lot of really interesting intellectual discussion. But for me, and I think for the rest of this panel here today as well, this debate topic today is about more than just an intellectual, theoretical discussion. For us, and for so many people in our world, diversity and inclusion is not just about having some nice marketing or winning industry awards or ticking a box or keeping the regulator happy. It's about real life for us, and it's something that affects us deeply on both a professional but also on a personal level. The ability to foster a diverse and inclusive workplace affects how safe we feel at work. It affects whether we feel we can be ourselves at work or whether we have to waste a lot of energy trying to be something we are not in order to fit in. Achieving good diversity and inclusion practices is the difference between us staying in the industry or giving up on it, because we simply have no role models to make us believe that we could ever succeed. It is the difference between us being able to represent the members and societies that we serve, or having huge blind spots when key decision makers do not represent the people whose decisions they affect. Diversity and inclusion even goes wider than just the people who work in our industry. We are an industry that influences billions of pounds of pension assets, and these are invested across most of the companies, sectors, and economies in the world. If the people in our industry are more diverse and representative of the wider world, if we have inclusive cultures that foster open conversations, then we are in a better position to think about how the decisions we make as an industry affect everything. Not just our own employees, not just the pension scheme members we serve, but society in general. I do really believe that if we truly embrace diversity and inclusion, we have the power to really make the whole world a more inclusive place. And the only way we can truly embrace diversity and inclusion is by introducing diversity quotas, as otherwise, as we've said, change will happen far too slowly. Now, this idea about using our diversity to change the world may sound a bit idealistic and overambitious, but let's be honest, I think all of us in this room, and definitely on this panel, are overambitious and idealistic. It's an idea that I fundamentally believe is true, because I have to, because I cannot accept our industry the way it is now, nor can I accept the world the way it is now. So I wanted to summarize with a quote from Angela Davis that really inspires me. You have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world. And you have to do it all the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think, Lauren, you're going to make some concluding remarks for the opposition.
I'm going to be quickish because I'm hungry and thirsty. So I think this debate comes down to behaviour. You know, we don't like being told what to do. I think we're all on a journey regarding diversity. And when it comes to affecting change, the best way to affect the change is to make sure people feel part of it. If people have concerns or issues, they need to go through that journey and be able to talk them through and express their thoughts and work on them. And then get on board and be part of the change. We've established that diversity is more than the characteristics that can be considered through quotas. People are complex and don't fit into boxes. We don't want to get into a position where certain diversity characteristics are rated more highly than others. And what about intersectionality? What if someone has multiple characteristics? Is that like, great, we've got you, nobody else matters, we'll have whatever. Like, how would it actually work in practice? Quotas don't celebrate difference. real buy-in and effort will. And we need to be prepared to put the work in. It will be hard at times, but it will be worth it. We have a room full of leaders, and there are a number of steps that we can take. Education about discrimination, education and celebration of different cultures and religions, information about being a good ally and standing up and stepping up, opportunity for cross-industry collaboration, mentoring and coaching for senior and junior staff. There's so many things that we could do that I think would be a more positive contribution than quotas. Thank you.
Lauren, thank you very much. So some really impassioned arguments there. So this is the point in the debate that I will hand back over to my colleague Daniel and really hope that the technology has worked. Daniel is going to conduct the final vote.
Yes, fingers crossed for that. And thanks once again to Lasia, to David, to Lauren and Daniel for their wonderful advocacy and engaging comments and speeches. Really enjoyed it. And thanks to everyone here as well, and those online for some great questions and comments. And thanks to Vicky, of course, last but not least, for chairing for us. We come now to the final vote. So hopefully yes, indeed, it appears. Good, excellent. This House believes that increasing diversity and inclusion on pension trustee boards is best achieved through use of quotas. So having heard what you've just heard, please would you vote once again. I'll give you a few seconds to do that, and then we'll have a look and see whether there's been any movement. Are quotas too simplistic and blunt instruments? Or can we be intentional enough to deliver structural change without them? I think we've probably had enough time there, so we can lock that one. Excellent. So I think now, if it all works, we're going to show the results of the initial indicative vote. Let's see if that comes up. Interesting. Against the motion, 65%. For the motion, 35%. I was expecting a few more against the motion, actually, there. But excellent. Okay, and can we have the final vote, please? Ooh. So. So we have had a bit of movement, which is great, and we don't like to declare winners and losers, but and I'm not sure the losers will be that disappointed to lose, knowing them as I do, but that's definitely a little bit of movement there. So well done, guys! Excellent speeches. So I had a gap in my notes here for an insightful and witty closing remark. I can't really think of a way of doing justice to those speeches, so I'm going to pass on that and just pass on a few other thank yous, which are due. It's a big team effort to deliver this debate, and thanks in particular to my colleagues Mark, of course, and to Venetia and Sally, amongst others, and a particularly big thank you to our trustee support team, Wana, Laura, Babs and Nina, who did most of the heavy lifting and didn't panic earlier when we got thrown out of the building and had to spend some time in the park together. So thank you, guys. That was much appreciated. And last but not least, thanks to my colleague James Rickards, who was responsible for the wine choices this evening. I like the white, I'm not sure about the red, but any feedback for James later. We do welcome suggestions for next year's debate. So if you've got any ideas that you want debated next time, please do feed them in. Always grateful to receive those. And finally, I'll just invite you all to come through to the Great Hall for some refreshments, and hope to see you all next year. Thank you very much indeed.